All right, hello everyone, and welcome to this Getting Published session at the 2021 Boundless Festival, curated for you by the lovely team at Writing New South Wales. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the First Nations storytellers and traditional custodians of the land that I'm broadcasting from today, the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. I recognise and celebrate their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and I pay my respects to all First Nations elders past and present on this land on which I'm an uninvited guest, and across Australia, which always was and always will be Aboriginal land. My name's Radhiah Chowdhury. I'm a writer, editor and advocate for inclusive publishing, and I am your chair for this evening's session. And it's my immense pleasure and privilege to be joined on this panel by three remarkable people that I am a massive fan of. I'm just going to go in order of as you appear on my screen because I couldn't choose between you. So first of all, we've got Camha Pham, an accredited freelance editor with over 9 years of experience in the publishing industry. Her clients include Hachette, Allen & Unwin, UQP, Hardy Grant and Wiley. And she currently sits on the editorial board of the Portside Review and was previously on the editorial board of Margaret River Press. Welcome, Camha.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Next, we have Charlene Cordallen, Head of Marketing at Hardy Grant Explore. Prior to this, she was the marketing manager at Text Publishing and has worked in book publishing for over a decade. Her interests include digital marketing and improving diversity outcomes within publishing. And she is the inaugural winner of the Australian book industry's Rising Star Award. So glad to see you, Shalini.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And last, but certainly not least, from unceded Gurungai country, we're joined by Michelle Cahill, a prize-winning writer of fiction, poetry, an established critic and editor, artistic director of Mascara Literary Review. Letters to Pessoa won the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award for New Writing, and Vish Varupa was shortlisted for the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards. And Michelle, so nice to meet you at last.
Great to meet you. It's great to be here. Thanks, Radhiah.
For everyone watching at home, standard Zoom rules apply, so please pop any questions into the chat and we'll have time to come to them in the second half of the panel. So let's get things started. Michelle and Camha, I thought we might start with you to maybe talk us through the editorial process as both writers and editors. We might start with you, Michelle, actually, as both a writer and an editor. What does the editorial process ideally look like to you as a writer?
Okay, well, thanks, Radhiah. And I just also like to say that I'm speaking to you from Gundungurra country, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners and to their ancestors, past, present, emerging, and thank them for their care of the land, languages, and their laws. And I'm just really grateful to be here. And I also like to thank Writing New South Wales and Bankstown Arts. It's so exciting to be here. Boundless. About editing and preparing a manuscript for publishing from a writer's perspective, particularly or specifically as a writer of colour, navigating the industry biases and so forth against our work in a white dominated field. It's a challenge, and I want to sort of emphasize how important it is as a process for the writer to sort of look at editing and give it time and be patient, and also to be extremely professional. It's very important that you never submit work that you haven't gone through several times and done as much editing and preparation as you know of. And if you don't, come to courses like this or acquaint yourselves. Writing New South Wales runs amazing courses as well in editing, and there are many industry editors that you can work with in order to prepare your work. So it is really, really vital, and there are two aspects of editing that I'm sure you guys know, copy editing and structural editing. So But it's very important that you begin and just do the copy editing and yourselves as well, and make sure that you never submit anything, whether it's to a literary journal or to a publisher or an agent, that is not extremely well gone through, and you know, make sure there's no typos, make sure the formatting is correct and how that they've requested it. And also be familiar with their books and this type of work that they do publish. So that's really important. I want to sort of mention a couple of things. Often you'll find that magazines and publishers will actually, they play quite a big role in terms of copy editing your manuscript. Say you've got to the point where it's been accepted for publication. So they will do that kind of work, and that's what good publishers should do, whether it's a literary journal, whether it's a book publisher. They may not necessarily do much structural editing, and by structural editing, I'm talking about considerations of the point of view, of the character development, of the narrative linear development, or how it's evolving in a non-linear fashion, how the book all fits together as a cohesive book, and how it can then, even considerations such as the title and citations and so forth. So those kinds of things, it's very, good publishers will take those on and allocate you to an editor who gives consideration to that if that needs to be considered. And it can be extremely challenging and confronting as well when you receive their appraisal of your what you thought was a really great manuscript, and they start asking you to rearrange parts of it to create the book. But I think it's also very important to remember that this process is a collaborative process. I'll get to that later. I just wanted to say a few more things about editing as such from the writer's point of view. So I want to, I've emphasised how important I think it is, because I think writing, the initial part of writing, is the inspirational part of writing, is the part that we love and we enjoy. It's the part where our senses are more involved, and we can drift into different spaces and find that there are energies which are unpredictable, which shape our work. And so that's really exciting. However, it's really important that we think about editing as a process that's one of discipline, and that we give it that time, because it's actually, what I think about editing, I think it's really, really hard work. And I think that whether you're in a literary journal and working as an editor, or you're a writer, or you're working for a publisher, yes, it's very hard work to look at a manuscript and to start to identify the things that need to be refined and finessed. Often, so I would say it's exhausting work, because it's about decision making. On a sentence by sentence level, you'll be looking at making decisions. Do I want to keep this in? Is this the right sort of syntax, order of words? Are these the specific words that I want to use? Is this the right register? And then what happens as the process develops is that time comes into it as well. Time becomes a factor, and that time places pressure on the decision-making process. So that's what makes it exhausting. You don't actually have as much time as you do in that gorgeous first creative phase of writing, when there's no limit at all on, you know, how long you've got to think about things, to change them, to take a different approach, to rid yourself of your false starts. And you don't have that. Once you get to a certain point with preparing a manuscript in the editing phase, the pressure of time becomes the thing that's exhausting, and you then have to be very, I think, tuned in. try to keep calm, make sure that you look after yourself, drink plenty of fluids, get exercise so that you have a clear mind, get lots of rest, so that you can sit down and not be sort of hunched over and like overwhelmed by like a big manuscript that you have to go through and, you know, freaking out about the decision making that you have to do. I like to tell you about a writer who's influenced me quite a lot, actually, and that's Jan Curtsey, the South Australia. He's now living in South Australia, originally from South Africa. I'm really a big fan of his work. In an early interview, he once said that when asked about writing, he described it as being hard work. He described it in terms of labour, and he described it very interestingly in terms of being industry. And I think that that's a really good way to think about it, because, you know, the fun part, the imaginative part is so important, but it also comes down to this phase when we come to the editing part where it is actually quite hard work.
Okay, well, in that
also talks
case,
about,
sorry, Michelle, if we could just maybe jump to Camha in terms of the work part of things, because that is your bread and butter, Camha. What, you know, I'm sure what Michelle's saying is in terms of the editorial process being a very time-consuming, painful labour at times. What's your perspective as someone who works as an editor in terms of engaging with the creative force that is an author?
Well, I mean, I think Michelle's covered it pretty well. But I just want to say that I think the editorial process looks very different across like different publishers, and also with different editors as well. So you might find that if your manuscript has been, has been accepted for publication, you'll be working with an editor in-house, and they'll be working on the big structural kind of developmental and structural edits with you for a period. And then once you've got that down pat, then they might outsource the copy edit to a freelance editor such as myself, and that's where I kind of come in and work with an author. And that process can look different as well, because sometimes I have that, I'm able to have that direct liaison with the author, and we can go back and forth, and it's a real collaborative process, as Michelle mentioned before. And that to me is very much the ideal editorial process, where we are able to, editors and authors can kind of come together and engage in that dialogue. But other times it can just be me communicating with the in-house project editor, and I don't have any direct contact with the author at all. So it really varies across the board. And I think it's really important for writers to really be aware of, to clarify, I guess, the editorial process before they begin, and know exactly what it is that they're getting into, to know, what they can expect. And also, as Michelle was mentioning before, the deadlines that you're expected to work with can be quite crazy at times, and sometimes really unrealistic. And this might happen after you've been working on your manuscript for, years, like up to a decade maybe. And then all of a sudden you're meant to do these edits within, a turnaround of like a week or two. And that can be a shock, I think, sometimes to authors when there's often a lot of feedback to take on board, not a lot of time to actually implement the changes that you might want to see on the page as well. So I think it's always best to clarify the expectation beforehand, just so that it's not a total surprise once you're in that editorial process. And I guess the best way, I think, to engage with the editorial process for me is to actually be open to the feedback, but also know that you have you have agency in terms of pushing back on edits that might not, suit the intention of what you're trying to achieve with your work. And I think a lot of the time, sometimes like emerging writers or people who are publishing their book for the first time don't understand that they do have power in the author-editor relationship, and you can say no, because edits at the end of the day are just suggestions. They're not, it's not like what the editor says has to remain. You can ask questions, you can push back, you can say no, that doesn't work for me, and that's completely fine, because it's your book, it's your name on the book at the end of the day, or it's your name in the byline. So you need to be happy with what ends up on the page. So I would encourage you as writers to just ask as many questions as you want. There's no such thing as a stupid question. And I love it when I get pushback from authors. Not all the time, I guess, but I guess it depends on how it's kind of constructed, but because it really makes me think as well in terms of like, well, why did I actually make that suggestion? Does that actually serve the work? And sometimes it might just be a case of having that dialogue with the author in terms of really working out what they're trying to do with their work.
Thank you so much, both of you. And we'll hopefully have time to come back to this towards the end of the session, and there'll be questions hopefully about it as well. So you've gotten your book acquired, and it's gone through the edits, and it's ready to go out into publication. And then there's this other big monstrous part of the process that we don't really talk about, and that is the sales and marketing and publicity of it all, which is, the thing that carries your book from the object that is printed into the thing that is in the market, the product. And we're so lucky to have Shalini with us. Shalini, what does the market-facing publishing process actually look like? How does sales and marketing and publicity work?
Yes, I have something that I prepared earlier to tell you exactly what that means. So hi, everybody. My name is Charlene Cordallen, and I am the head of marketing for Hardy Grant Books and Explore. I'm based in Melbourne. And I thought today I would give you a bit of a crash course, on the sales, marketing, and publicity aspects of publishing. And what I've done is I've used a book as a case study, and it's a book that we published recently. So I'll just, without further ado, I might just crack on. There's just a little bit to get through. I'm going to try and get into presenter mode whilst I'm at it. So just a bit about myself, just so you get an overview of what a marketer actually does. I manage a team of 4. It's made up of people who work on the retail side of marketing, people who work on consumer side of marketing, and people who work on data and systems. So my job is to manage all the activity, grow our customer databases, deal with authors, attend acquisition meetings, cover meetings, and work on strategy collectively with the rest of the team. So the case study is Dear Son by Thomas Mayer. It's a really wonderful book. It's an anthology of letters that various First Nations men wrote to their sons. The book was conceived by Thomas Mayer after he witnessed the kind of awful backlash that came from Bill Leak's very racist cartoons, depicting an Aboriginal man not recognizing his son because he was drunk. So he wanted to really break the stereotypes of Aboriginal men and write some incredibly vulnerable and moving letters in this book. So that's a bit of a description of the book. So our life goals in sales, marketing, and publicity are really to create awareness, engagement, obviously sales, and then also grow an author or a genre's community. So basically making sure that all our work has gone into expanding an author's profile in order for them to, perhaps if they want to write another book, that sort of thing, kind of continuing momentum. So I just wanted to show you this spreadsheet because this is not something that many of you, who kind of, even people who would have encounters with marketing and publicity and sales, like you might not necessarily get to see this bit. And this is actually what holds, like this art, once the book kind of gets edited and everybody has read it, we all sit around and, we go to things like positioning meetings, campaign meetings. And once we get the book in focus, we enter a lot of information into a data system, and that goes out and feeds out to all retailers across the country, so that if you want to buy a book from Your Readings or Booktopia, it's up there and has the information it requires. It also is connected to our sales team. So Hardy Grant has its own national sales team. So they're the first people that go out and speak to the market, really. So they're talking to booksellers, they do sell-ins, they might visit your local independent or a national chain buyer. And it all happens in this about 6-month period before the book is actually published. So this is what this scary but insightful sales spreadsheet is trying to illustrate. Is everyone on mute? Actually, I can hear some feedback. Thanks. So there's 2 components to marketing. There's the retail side of marketing, and then there's the consumer side of marketing. So these are some of the activities that we would do for when we're talking to booksellers. So we would have a conference where we would invite booksellers to discuss some of our key titles for the year. And last year this year actually, we obviously couldn't do that, so we actually turned it into an online roadshow. We would make sure that our books got into all the different bookseller catalogs that you might be familiar with, like the Dimmick's catalog, or even Booktopia, which has paid sort of activities that publishers can then pay for in order to promote their book via Booktopia's channels. We would also send copies out to booksellers to make sure that this is really part of like the engagement side of things, where we would send reading copies out to booksellers, include a note from the author to really get that connection happening, so that when the bookseller's wanting to promote the book, they would really understand what the book is about, and sell it with conviction. So this is Thomas. This is just a video that he did for us. He actually invited all the contributors from the book to tell their own story, and we stitched together in this really simple YouTube video and shared it during our online roadshow, and then later on shared it across our social channels as well. This is what a bookseller letter looks like. It's pretty simple. It just contains a very short, heartfelt letter from the author. And we sort of work with our sales team to target booksellers across the country, booksellers who we know are going to really love the book and read it. This is our Father's Day gift guide. So just showing you that these are some of the other ways that we promote the book. So we featured the book as the cover, the feature title in the Father's Day gift guide. Obviously, the book is called Dear Son, so it had a lot of marketing around the Father's Day period, but our goal was really to break it out of that Father's Day period as well, because it was so much more than that. Marketing to readers. So obviously this year and last year was a very online marketing year. We did so much online, and because we couldn't sort of do traditional things like events and things like that, which are all really super important. And we miss them, and we want to keep doing them. But this year we did a lot of, sending off digital assets to booksellers so that they would promote it on their social media channels, doing Insta Lives with some of the contributors, so that the book and the author would be promoted to all these different audiences online as well. We got some amazing videos from the contributors talking about the experience writing for the book, and shared that across the board. We also we sent out copies to various book lovers online. So we call them bookstagrammers, for those of you who don't know. And it's really just about increasing visibility. Social media is a proven platform for selling books. And so we know this, and so we're trying to get visibility across the board by sharing it with the right people online. We also did some book talk outreach. So we sent copies. This is basically the same thing. We sent out books to a couple of book talkers to get them talking about the book, because some of you might know that book talk has really been a boon for promotions and books and sales. Some of the author videos, and this is some of the social media that we generated from the marketing team. We also did a lot of advertising for this book online, just across different audiences, and you can sort of have a look at some of the publications there. And we did social media advertising as well. So I don't work in publicity, but I've worked in the industry long enough to tell you what the difference is. Basically, book publicity is free, and book marketing usually involves a cost. There are sort of increasingly, there are more overlaps within the two, just because of the way, you know, the media space shrinking, etc., and social media becoming such a big space to play in. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. And this is the publicity that Thomas's publicist generated for Dear Son. So she pitched the book across radio, print, online, and television, and managed to get some really great coverage for the book. So just some ideas and tips on how you can engage with the sales, marketing, and publicity teams in your publisher. I think it's really about understanding what everybody does and making sure that, you know, you also know that everybody in sales, marketing, publicity has a role to play when creating your book and promoting your book. So try to understand what they do and be nice to them, essentially. But I think, you know, I think with authors, I've worked with lots of different kinds of authors. Some people are, you know, just more extroverted and some people are more introverted. But I think the way, and you don't have to all be on social media talking about your book every single time, but I think it is important to think about stepping outside of your comfort zone, thinking about, you know, practicing public speaking and how you might present yourself online or in person, thinking about a really engaging pitch for your book. You know, if someone asks you, like, what is your book about? Like, think about an elevator pitch, something that you can really like succinctly condense, but also engage people and you know, spark some interest. There's so many resources out there in author marketing. It is important that you think about how you might want to engage with that, but also focusing on the areas that you feel more an affinity with and not trying to do it all. Talk to your publisher, get some advice, but I think increasingly publishers need authors to also be part of the marketing machine. So I would say, yeah, try and engage with that way. That's it.
Thank you so much, Shalini. I think it's the theme across what Camha and Michelle and Shalini you've all said is that communication is very much the key to any author relationship with any publisher, whether it's, you know, a trade book publisher or a magazine. You know, it's a collaboration, it's a conversation, and I think it's very easy when you're an emerging writer or someone who's, you know, on the pathway you want to get published to cede that power to the publishers around you, thinking that, you know, if I make myself agreeable and small, then maybe I'll get a deal. But I think it's really important to find that midway ground between, you know, your vision and what you want to be represented as, and, you know, the expertise that a publisher is bringing to you, because otherwise, of course, you know, you could just self-publish. I shouldn't say just, you could self-publish. So, you know, what are you giving up for the relationship that you want with the publisher, and, you know, to really understand that is, you know, hopefully a long-term relationship. So you need to put into it the care that you would put into any long-term relationship. So in the time that we've got remaining before we sort of get to any questions that come through, and everyone please just pop any questions you might have into the chat if we haven't covered it. I thought maybe we could just do this a little bit more round table instead of me directing question to one of you at a time. Because, you know, ideally, this is the Boundless Festival. We're talking to a lot of writers who are traditionally underrepresented in our industries and our cultural output in this country. So, you know, first of all, what advice would all of you at different points give to someone who's seeking publication? And then maybe let's talk about some different pathways to achieving that. Who wants to go first?
I can. So I think, you know, when you're writing a book, it's really important to read other authors, go to the bookshop, talk to your booksellers. Publishers are possibly so much more transparent than they ever have been, you know, like in terms of showing what they do behind the scenes. A lot of publishers have writing academies or events that they might have at bookshops and things like that. Go there, engage with them. And if you're located remotely, engage with engage with all these different communities online. There are ways of doing that as well. But yeah, I think understanding the industry and the landscape that you're writing and reading in is really important. Like if you're writing magical realism, for example, what are all the other magical realist authors who you love, and look at the way they're being published and promoted, the way the book is spoken about, understanding that space. So yeah.
I would say, like, I know this panel is called Getting Published, but I just want to say there's like no rush in getting published as well. So I would say take your time, because, writing is very much about craft and voice, and, craft is something that we can all learn and improve upon, but I feel like voice can take time to develop, and it doesn't always happen straight away. And I do think some writers feel that pressure to, publish when they're quite young, or, to be on the like 25 before 25 list, those kind of things. But, I don't think there's any harm in just taking the time to really develop your voice, know yourself, write the story that you want to write, and be proud of a book that will eventually end up being published, So take that pressure off yourself. You don't need to write the book before you turn 25. Like, there are lots of debut writers who are in their 70s and they do well as well. Just another point I'd like to make is, I think when you're engaging in the editorial experience as well, writers should always try and like learn something from each editing experience. Like, they should take away, like, whether you learn something like technical or something about your own process as a writer, like really treat that editorial experience as an opportunity to learn something. Because I've had like a few writers say to me now, and I guess this is more directed towards submissions for journals and that kind of thing rather than manuscripts, but they haven't had any kind of feedback on their pieces of writing, and I feel like that's a real shame, and it's just like such a lost opportunity, because you don't really get to grow as a writer in that respect, because you're not taking on board any feedback or anything like that. So, as I said before, ask all of the questions, even if you think you're being annoying, you're not. Like, this is a chance for you to learn and develop and grow as a writer and a creative and a practitioner. So ask away.
It's wonderful. Michelle, anything to add? You're on mute.
I think I would say that so my work has been quite literary, and I think that I want to say something towards people who might be writing poetry or poetic prose, and just sort of address them, because it's actually very hard to get those genres published anywhere. I think it's not just Australia, but anywhere. And so, just to give you some strategies, getting your work published in literary journals is a really good beginning, and you can work from that towards getting a collection of poetry or a collection of prose published. This is what I did, and there are some really good small independent presses in Australia, which is worth mentioning, and they operate in much the same way that we've been talking about, but sort of lower scale in a way. And so that I think it's really something to bear in mind. There are some which are actually quite small and don't necessarily get into awards or whatever like that, or don't get that much. The books don't necessarily get reviewed that much, but it doesn't necessarily matter. What really matters is if you are a literary writer, or any kind of writer anyway, but I think particularly if you are a literary writer, what really matters is what Camha was saying about not rushing. What matters is the work is good, and that's really important, that because you can't, once something is published, it can't be sort of changed. It's possible it could be, but it would be very hard to change it. So in some ways, once it's published, I think of it as that there's sort of a loss, because it's going, the story or the poem or the book or whatever is actually leaving me, and it goes to the publishers, it goes to the marketing people or whatever, or it goes to the magazine, and I have no more sort of input into it in a way. So therefore, it's really important to take your time and to be really sure of the work, because ultimately, I've noticed some questions popping up about agents and stuff like that. I also want to say that if you are sort of more on the literary side, like a poet or a prose writer that's more on the literary side, I think you can be your own agent. What's important as a writer of colour is to know what story, or any writer really, it's just to know what story you're telling, to work on your particular voice, as Camha was saying, and in some ways, whatever editorial feedback that you do get, or appraisals and what have you, all of which is helpful, but I also would like to suggest that in some ways there's something sort of particularly unique about your writing journey that only you can really ultimately kind of know what's right in a way. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, there's a compromise when it comes to publishing a book, because there are some decisions where there's a lot of decisions that involve a lot of collaboration, and you need to understand there is communication, and it's more than just you as the author sort of getting that out there. But at the same time, in terms of your writing, I think there's something about you being your own editor, which I was sort of talking about before, about you knowing your own work, and you can in some ways be a very good advocate for your own work, and sort of get to a point where you might sort of build up and start in poetry or something like that, and then sort of build up. So I think that's another alternative pathway to mention. And also to mention the pathways that sometimes people take by doing, say, a master's degree with a creative writing project, or they might do a doctorate of creative arts, something like that, can also be an alternative pathway to getting published. And also there's places like Varuna and other sort of writing residencies which offer sort of in-house kind of assistance and workshopping here and overseas, which can be really helpful to you. So it's a bit of a journey, and it's kind of a long-term thing, I think, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And to be adaptable to that journey, that, you know, if something shifts, that you shift with it. And to know, I think also it's important to know what you're in this for. If you're in it to hold a physical book in your hand, well, there are lots of ways you can do that, and there are lots of compromises that you might have to make in order to get there. But if there's something about your craft and your writing, that learning process that both Camha and Michelle have talked about, and Shalini, like in terms of the education of yourself as an author, as a published author or not, it's such a valuable thing that only you can benefit from. So yeah, I think maybe having a really, really long and constant think about what you're in it for, what you're trying to get out of it, and being prepared to let that change as you change as well. We have some questions actually, so we might pop to them and then come back to this if we have some more time. First question is from Amy Ingram, who's asked what the best program is to edit in, like Scrivener or Word. Any thoughts? No?
I only know Word. I've only ever used Word.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I don't use Scrivener, so it's more of a writing question.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say having been in the trade industry for 10 years, publishers are notoriously technophobic, so keeping things simple, I would definitely recommend keeping things simple. I think it's more about what works best for you as a writer. If the output of a particular program works for you, that's great, but if you then can't share it with your editor, then you're gonna, there's like sort of communication problem there already. So that's not a particularly useful answer, but Okay, from Benjamin Lee, we've got how much say does the writer have in the marketing and publicity side? For example, if they want to be marketed as a POC front and center. Sorry, if they wouldn't want to be marketed as a POC front and center, but want to focus more on the story themselves.
I think I can answer that one. I think absolutely. I think this is part of what we discussed earlier about having the collaborative, open conversation with your publisher. I think most people would understand that need and want. So I don't think you're going to have any issues around that. But at the same time, I can see how, like, because we do exist in a white-dominated industry, that could be used to your detriment. So I think absolutely speak to your publisher about it. And yes, you do have a say. Very often when, once the editorial process is done and the marketing and publicity teams are working on pitching your book, generally speaking, like, they will have a conversation with you about that and how they're doing that and who they're approaching, etc. And you have, you can basically express your needs and wants then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a quick case of understanding, again, what your publisher is bringing to the table. So a commercial trade publisher is going to be chasing sales. That, we're commercial enterprises. You have to make money basically at the end of the day. So definitely worth thinking as an author, and I'm speaking as an author myself who's had this happen, in terms of, if the thing that makes your book stand out in a very white homogenous market is that you are a POC writer, I guess it's a question of compromise on your part, whether you are prepared to compromise. You might not be, and I think that's you're perfectly within your rights to say that and to make that known to your publisher. But if your marketing and publicity team go on that angle, it might be because that is actually the best way to clear some oxygen for your book in what is otherwise quite a crowded market. So I think being brave enough to ask those questions, I think, is really important. Again, no such thing as a stupid question. But to say, why have you gone in for that particular angle on my particular book, and have you considered others, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, depending on how diverse your marketing and publicity teams are, you should be able to have those conversations pretty openly. And like, I think there would be an implicit understanding of those, and in fact, probably a proactive push not to do that from the get-go.
Yeah.
So again, this is like, the benefits of having a diverse team. But yeah, I think don't ever be afraid to educate your publicist or marketer on, and I think nobody in the publishing team wants to do anything that you don't want to do, and are often horrified if you are upset or, maybe have a concern that you express later. So it's always best to discuss it in the moment.
Yeah. It is absolutely awful if you have to do the educating, but, also if you don't ask, you don't get. So, yeah, it's that sort of decision whether you're capable emotionally, mentally, whatever, to have those conversations. And that goes for editorial things as well, absolutely. Okay, next question from Brahmi Kurasami. What if you want to contribute to a collection of essays rather than write your own, I assume, complete work? How do you come upon such opportunities?
So this is about publishing a collection of essays. So normally you would be putting together a book proposal for the publisher.
I think this is contributing to a collection that's not your own, so an anthology.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I guess there are quite a few anthologies at the moment. So are you asking about, like, what are your best chances of getting published in one of those?
Yeah, how do you find them?
I think they've been advertised quite like openly, like just across social media. That's how I'm aware of the anthologies that are seeking contributors. Where else? In places like Books and Publishing as well. Yeah, I'm not sure where else I would go. Yeah.
Just to add to that, so yes, I think, there are definitely certain publications that put out anthologies. Liminal is one of them. Even SBS Voices has an anthology that they put out every year, part of the SBS Voices Emerging Writers Program. So I think it's about trying to find the spaces that they exist in, and then, so not always I think there are open entries for a lot of these publications, but sometimes it's like, you know, the editors tend to tap into their own networks as well. So it's about really being on top of those, the open dates when they do happen.
Yeah, I think it's actually in line with what you're saying, Shalini, in terms of like educating yourself about the market, to educate yourself in terms of who is publishing what every year. Sorry, Michelle, I think I cut you off.
Thanks. I was just going to say that I'd like to just mention Mascara. This is a good opportunity for me to mention that we're a highly regarded literary journal. We have a lot of readers, both in Australia and overseas, and we've published a lot of diverse writers who've gone on to have amazing careers. And we also publish a lot of literary criticism as well. We're not as kind of mainstream as some of the other journals, but please do check us out, because I think it's a really good start. Sometimes when you're having to make that first kind of step of, like, you know, because a lot of it's about just becoming visible and sort of people getting to know your work. So often the other thing is sometimes publishers do actually read our issues and have actually written to me. Small independent publishers usually have actually written to me and said, you know, in that particular issue I liked, you know, could you put me in touch with this person? So it's well worth having a beautiful piece that's really well worked to go out and get some attention and some readers.
Yeah, I think we're really lucky in this country with the literary magazines we have. Mascara obviously among them. Yeah, so I think, again, look around, see who's publishing the kinds of things that you want to be doing, and sort of take it from there, I think. We've had a couple of questions about Australian publishers being ageist. Have we found publishers to be particularly ageist in Australia?
I don't think so at all. No, I wouldn't say so at all. I think publishers are just really interested in a fantastic story, something different, a new voice. It doesn't really matter about your age, I would say. Although, of course, there is that thing about a young writer, and there's lots of prizes for young writers, and there's that thing, isn't there? That sort of, but I don't think it should stop you at all how old you are.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Right, publishers and take it very seriously.
Yeah.
They do. They take their work very seriously, and they're very proud of the work that they publish. So it doesn't matter what you look like, how old you are. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I've worked with writers from all different age groups. The author who won the Miles Franklin this year is in her 60s or 70s, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it really comes down to the work. Yeah.
I think there are barriers for access, absolutely, but age doesn't. I think there is definitely a disconnect between those emerging writers programs that are usually for, you know, people 35 or 30 and under, and what publishers are actually putting out. Because if you look into the average publishing house, the average publisher's at least 40 or older. So there's certainly not bias on that front. There's biases on other fronts, unconscious biases and conscious ones. But age doesn't. Yeah, some of our best-selling authors in this country are pushing 70 and 80. So yeah. Okay, so where is the best place to get the feedback that we've been talking about today in terms of, I guess, editorial?
Yeah, I mean, there are many places that you can get feedback. You can go to places like Writing New South Wales or Writers Vic and get a manuscript assessment done. You can, also access Writers Group as well. And I know, if you are writing, then you probably are part of, either a formal or informal writing group. So that's another place where you can seek feedback on your work or manuscript. And even just getting it out to people whose opinion you trust, and they might not necessarily be writers themselves, but that can be another place where you get, a critique of your work. Probably not the best option to, ask your friends or your mum and dad, who will probably just give you all the praise that you want to hear. You are trying to get like a critique of your work, so that you can essentially get it to improve it to a standard that you want to see it at. And there's also been a few mentoring initiatives that I've seen advertised lately as well, so that could be another pathway to go down, in terms of actually getting a writing mentor, and just have someone that you can kind of talk to on a monthly or whatever it is basis, in order to get some feedback as well. So
yeah, and I think if you're writing a longer work and it's not quite there yet, even perfecting a chapter and seeing which magazine or publication might be looking for entries, and if that piece works as a standalone, that could be a really great way to go through the process of getting feedback in the real world. It can be confronting, but it's also incredibly educational.
Yeah. Michelle, anything to add?
No, I think that sort of you guys have covered those aspects. Yeah, I think we've mentioned all the initiatives. I think Writing New South Wales or Victoria, if you're starting out writing New South Wales or Vic Writers, is a really good place to start. And you should very quickly be familiar with some of the main groups and organisations that are involved, particularly for writers of colour. And it's exciting, I think, to see more editors of colour being involved in publication and in the whole process. And I think that's really important, that there's more editors of colour, and that I also feel that it's very important that there's more critics of colour as well. And because that's a space that's quite dominated by white fellas, really. So we need a lot more critics of colour, and criticism is not the sexy part of the industry, but I think it's really cool. I think it's one of those things that you come to appreciate more in a slow way. Yeah, it's really cool, because I feel like criticism is actually placing pressure on the industry by placing pressure on the academy to actually involve writers of colour on teaching curriculums, to study writers of colour and research writers of colour, and have that investment happening, and that then feeds into publishing. So I think criticism is something that I think, in going forward in the future, I hope to see much more of it in Australia.
Yeah. It's also potentially a place for certain writers to stretch their muscles a little bit if you want to go into the criticism side of things as well. Being a critic of someone else's work might actually help you be a critic of your own.
And also be a writer as well. It can often open opportunities. So I definitely would encourage you, if you're given the opportunity as an emerging writer to write a review, give it a go, because we really want to hear a diverse range of critics responding to books and responding to literary texts, not just a particular cohort. We want to have different readers, and give it a go, because you will get attention, and it can be a way of having that conversation begin about what your interests are.
Yeah, absolutely. We might have time for a couple more. There's one from Arani. How important is it for debut novelists to have smaller publications already, such as short stories and articles, for them to be considered by publishers?
I think it always it bodes well. I think when you're considering, I've definitely looked at manuscripts for acquisition, and it sort of says that this person is a serious writer and has already done a bit of work before they've come to us. So I think it's not absolutely essential, but it does. We do view upon favorably.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think, Shalini, you've pretty much covered it. But actually, I'd like to get your thoughts. Like, I remember listening to a podcast, and the editor was saying how when they receive a manuscript now, it's basically 50% manuscript, 50% author. So it's just that little bio that they will focus on in terms of whether or not to proceed with the manuscript, and I'm wondering how true that is from a
yeah, look, I think there would be some publishers who would do a lot of that profile publishing, depending on the kinds of books. I guess I think I would say that a publisher that focuses a lot mostly on literary text would not be doing that, because it's really about the work that that kind of is the main sort of offering. That's a pretty big percentage on the author. I'm sure that happens. Especially it does happen sometimes at Hardy Grant, because we work so much on like subject-led like cookbooks and things like that, and also with a profile definitely helps the marketing of the book. I think it varies.
Yeah, I think increasingly with trade publishers, we are getting more data driven. So every time a book goes into acquisitions, a question will be asked in terms of what is the saleability of this author, purely in terms of, social media following, or this particular article they wrote for The Guardian got this many views and things like that. So knowing that is a conversation that is happening at a lot of publishers is definitely worthwhile. But I certainly wouldn't think of it as a barrier to access if you don't have that experience, because obviously that is what work that you're putting into doing the smaller publications might be work that you would prefer to put into your main work. So, again, it's a matter of knowing where your own boundaries are, your own lines are, and making it really, being very strategic about your career, I think, is a really good way to approach anything. It's really tempting to think about the starving artist in the garret and, that dream of this romantic author, but, you're a brand. Think of yourself as the brand. What do you represent? How do you want to be represented? Who do you want to represent you? And be very strategic. This is my first book. This is my second. This is my third. This is how I want to be known. And educate yourself. I keep saying, and I know, but to really, really dig into what is happening in the world, where you fit in it. Great if you can say that you can find no comparison for yourself. But publishing is a business of comparison. So if you can even find a small thing, like I am a little bit like this other author, that often helps as well. And when it comes to comparison titles, the thing I always tell my authors is, don't think of it as I'm a copycat. Think of it as, my book is friends with other books. Who are they friends with? Because that's really the more helpful way of thinking about it. Who do you want to be shelved next to? One more question. We've got 2 minutes to go. Would it help to find well-known people who might recommend your novel than to find an agent or a publisher? Sorry, I mispronounced that.
I can probably speak to this question about an agent. I just wanted to say something about that.
Sure.
I think it can be a really great thing, but you don't have to have an agent. You really don't have to have an agent. I think remember that your publisher is the person that you're working with, and try to respect that relationship and work with them. And of course, sometimes there'll be things that you're dubious about, but understanding that it is a collaborative process, and that respecting their expertise as well. Like your expertise is the writing, and many years happen in the role that you do as a writer. And then when it comes to the part about publishing, they have their own expertise, and respecting that and working with them is a really good thing, I think, in many ways, even though it might involve compromises, and they can be really substantial compromises in a way. But what their job is to get that out, and that's to getting your voice out, and that might actually lead to something better as well, and your opportunities down the track. But I would say as well that, I don't think you need an agent. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. Maybe just have a think about what an agent would be bringing to you. because different agents will be bringing you different things. And certainly on the contract side of things, it helps to have an agent. But there are agents who will freelance and look at your contract for you without you needing to give them 15% of your earnings or whatever the percentage is. And we're very lucky in this country that publishers do take quite a lot of unsolicited manuscripts, which is not the case in a lot of other countries. So yeah, just to have a think about whether an agent brings you value, they might, or whether it's something that you can do without.
I also want to say something, if I can, Radhiah,
Sure.
about agents and writers of colour.
Go for it.
I think that I had like a really great agent, like one of supposedly like the best, and it was, I learned so much about racism just through this whole process, like what it actually is, how it actually works in the industry, you know. And that's why I say to writers of colour, you know your stuff, right? Just be close to your work, make sure your work is good, and that takes obviously a long time, so be patient. But if you really love writing, then, and you will persist with it, and you will be professional and patient, and you'll, you know, learn from lots of people, and you'll be involved in a discussion, and you'll be involved in a community, and you'll participate all of those ways. Ultimately, no one can stop you, and probably you will know your work a lot better than an agent will. So don't necessarily think that having an agent means that you're going to get that contract. That's what I'd say.
Right. Well, I mean, what a place to leave it. I mean, I could honestly sit and talk to you guys all night, but unfortunately we are actually out of time. We are over time. Sorry, Writing New South Wales. Thank you so much, all of you, Camha, Michelle, Shalini, for joining me and being just so expansive and generous with your insights. And thank you to the Boundless Festival and to the Writing New South Wales team and Bankstown Arts for curating this wonderful panel. And thank you everyone who's tuned in. I hope this was at least a little bit useful. And thank you for tuning in. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Radhiah.
Thank you.
Bye.